All right, Grand Rising. Wait, can you hear me? It doesn't seem
Yes,
like it. Oh, you
I
can
can
hear
hear.
me? Okay. All right.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So this is going to be an overview of the executor process. So, in the timeline of processes, you would do your treasury packet, your first treasury packet, you would do your second treasury packet, then you would do your beneficial owner paperwork, because, like I said, those are all documents that you hold on to. Then you move into this executor process. So, basically, in the first three steps, you're trying to establish who you are, take control over, at least, paperwork wise, documented control over your accounts with the Treasury that they have assigned to you. And with the beneficial owner, then you're just clearing up any potential ownership challenges to the accounts. So you want to get those done first because, again, you have to establish that number one, you're living. Number two, you are the legitimate owner of the Social Security person, and that any other individual or entity that's claiming beneficial ownership over the Social Security person is doing so in fraud. So you're really laying the foundation for if there's any challenges to any of the things that you do from this point moving forward. Because once you do executor, then you kind of got to move into the Roman citizenship and also the admirals. We have to talk. Wow, those aren't even on my list. Okay. Um, uh, there's no need to even like trying to wrap your mind around this until you really understand like what you're doing with the treasury, the secure creditor process, and with the beneficial owner process. Wow, that's crazy. Those aren't even on my list. I need to write this down. So the executor process or setup is taking control of the estate. Now, everybody has heard, oh, there's an estate on my account. This is not related. This information is not related to if you file an estate um, tax return until you do this executor process. So that's the part that the individual who teaches that the estate tax return, I'm not really sure why she doesn't get into the executor because it would legitimize the entire thing. Like, oh, I've already set my account. It's already in line, and yeah, you need to decide what's the problem. So I'm not really sure why she doesn't teach this part, but it's a little bit complicated. And the person who really teaches this, if you can find any of his information on YouTube, which is very, very difficult, his name was David Clarence. And he does have some of his videos on archive.org. You can find some of them there. But honestly, it's very, very difficult information to find. I happen to end up with a folder that has a bunch of the documents, and assume somebody was selling this at some point because, of course. But basically, the executor position is really putting yourself in charge of your estate. Now, every state, because it's a executor state, so it's kind of like Maryland state, Florida state, you putting yourself in that same category, which means that, which is true. It's not you are the person who's in charge of the state. Okay, I'm on the phone. You're the person who's in charge of the state, and so until you claim that position, these broader states like um, like I said, Florida State, Maryland State, District of Columbia, whoever, they retain um, executive position of of your estate until you actually take the actual position of executor or executrix. So that's what this is. And like I said, there's really no point doing this until you've done the other steps, because you're building a case. Like, you're building a case that you are the person who's supposed to be in charge of the state, which is why I wouldn't do this first, because you don't even have, if you do this before you do anything else, you don't even have an estate set up. This, the secure creditor process gives you um, credits on file, on retainer file with the Treasury. The beneficial owner says that you're the owner of the credits. Now, once those things are established, then you can start telling them how to move the credits around. And that's basically what the executor or executrix does. They tell these different entities how to move these credits around. Now, this is another case of they don't care. You know, I mean, you can send letters till the cows come home. You can do whatever you want. They don't care. So it's not like to solve any of those kind of like immediate problems of putting money in your hands. None of these processes do this. I know nobody ever wants to say that, but it's the absolute truth. This is a ounce of prevention being better than a pound of cure. This is absolute protection. All of these processes are absolute protection if there's a problem. And that's it. There's no one of these things is just like some magic thing that's going to solve everything. It just doesn't work like that. And a lot of people have made a lot of money by telling people that it does, but having spent the last like 3 full years doing this stuff, after being in close contact with people who have been doing this for even longer, and seeing that basically the results are the same, I can pretty much definitively say this is prevention. This is not cure. So that's something I'll be saying a lot, because people they really need to understand that that's how it works. So one of the things that you would do first, because this is not mentioned when people do talk about this estate executor process, is that you have to accept the position. So there's a document that you fill out where you accept the position of the executor. And executor documents have to be, because you are operating as an e-state within a state, within a larger state too, not just the physical state that you live in, but the state of the United States. You're operating as an actual state within the United States. Copies of these documents always have to be sent to the Attorney General and the Governor's office within your state. The first document, like I mentioned, is called the acceptance, executor acceptance, and in that document, it's very similar to other documents that you would have done up to this process, but it just lays out that, hey, executor position for this estate, I'm in charge now, and basically you guys are all fired because you didn't do your jobs, and no, I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you this is how it's going to work. And making it very clear that the state of Florida, of Maryland, state of Washington has no authority, because they didn't do their jobs by making sure that you were taken care of and that everything was taken care of. So the thing about this is, when you get to this estate process, you start to get a different perspective of the legal process, because basically, as an executor, whatever statement you make is the law, because it's literally just like if a politician, a state, congressman, whatever, Congress, they issue a law that has to be followed and put on the books. That's what these executor letters are. They are literally the law for your estate. So this is this thought process is similar to the Admiralty process, which makes you a Admiralty judge, but this is like, no, you are like the president of your, that's what executor is. It's like the president of your estate. And so you, um, number one, all your documents, beside accepting the executor acceptance letter, have to be printed in blue ink. They have to be notarized uh, by a, yeah, they have to be notarized, they have to be printed in blue ink, and they have to be on legal paper. So this moves you from the regular letters, because those are just, when you use 8.5 by 11, that's a letter. You know, those are just letters. Those are just requests. When you get into the 11 by 16, now that's legal. That's a, it's a difference. So uh you print those on legal paper, and that will be in the blue ink and whatever. So, but again, those documents are usually fairly short. There's not a lot of text in there. You cannot use any statutes once you move into the estate, because the statutes are the rules of other states, like Florida State, Georgia State. You know, those are state laws. But as an estate, an executor state, you're not subject to those particular laws of that particular state. So that is a huge shift in how you approach the processes and also what's going on. So that's why it's better to get, if you have to deal inside the legal system, you want to get a lot of that stuff done before you get to this point, because once you get here, you don't write letters where you're quoting state law. You just, that's, you can't. It'll, actually, you probably get in trouble. That's, you know, one way they like to put people in trouble, but it'll invalidate what you say. So you have to work on, as an executor of common law, like this real, like, application of common law. Um this executor process, the Roman citizenship process, and the Admiralty process. Well, Admiralty runs on whaling law, which is maritime law, but specifically whaling law is what Admiralty runs under. Estate and well, really common law and Roman citizenship, like biblical law, but it's still basically, they're all like common law. The common law is the prevailing legal theory that runs through biblical law, maritime law, and estate law is common law. So on the first parts, you're not really using common law, you use statutes. From this point on, you're not going to be using statutes, you're going to be using common law. This includes things like the Constitution, the amendments. You don't refer to that stuff. That stuff doesn't. You can accept it, but it's not. It's not a point, because technically you're not going to really be putting these hats on, like as the executor or the Roman citizen or the admiral in Admiralty. You're not going to be using those except on paper. I wouldn't be using these in public. It would be just to respond to things that are mailed to you with your name on it, basically, until something changes, which I guess I'll interrupt myself. I heard that in the reconciliation package that's being pushed through Congress now, this one big beautiful bill, they're adding a provision for, if you have a child that's under the age of 8, um, born before 2024, something like that, that you will be able to open up a savings account for them, which is basically the same thing as this C'esti Que Trust. They're making it a part of the law that you can do this. You can physically do this, and you can contribute. They'll match you $1,000 as an initial deposit, and then you can contribute after tax $5 max per year. per child. So, and then they get partial access to it at age 25, which is age of maturity, and then at 30 they get full access to it. So it's kind of like they're acknowledging that all these things exist by trying to normalize them. I could not have predicted that because that actually seems insane. So the benefit of this executor process is that once you claim the executor position of your personal estate, this is when you start to go back to your ancestors and claim their estates. Because all their estates are still open, floating out there, being charged or being pillaged. They're all wide open. So once you get your taken care of, any dead ancestors that you have, you can go back and make yourself the executor of their estates too. You can't do that as any kind of citizen. You would have to get from an executor position, a position that's outside of their statutory law. Don't allow that in the statutory law. You have to be in a position of an executor. So once you're an executor for yours, then you can be an executor for someone else's. But you wouldn't want to be an executor for your kids. You kind of leave them floating around in the system until 25 or 30 when they have to actually start to do this stuff. Which I wouldn't even recommend doing this. A lot of this stuff before 30, because at least you got to be 25, because you can start some of it, but really you have to be 25 to be an executor because you reach the age of majority. Same thing with Admiralty. You have to have reached the age of majority. So, okay, let me go through. I do have a list here, but it's got a lot of definitions on it, and I don't want to overwhelm you because it's a lot. This process is a little bit complicated. So, because there's a document I have. It's called Comprehending the Estate Office. It is 53 pages. So, just to say that the guy David Clarence, he was very, very thorough in documenting this work. It's just that a lot of his actual conversations about it have been scrubbed from the internet. So you can't really hear him talk about it. But you don't need to hear him talk about it too much to get a general understanding of it. So the estate name is the all caps name, comma estate, except there's 4 spaces in between your middle name and your last name, due to the nature of how the estate is. When you get an EIN number, it has those 4 spaces there. So let's see, it has I'm not going to go into all of this. This is just too much. Let's see. Okay, so a point about the executor office is once you occupy the executor office, you cannot be considered or called shadow. You also can't be a slave owner. That takes you out of that category which people are put in from birth, because you're both the slave and the slave owner in the system, no matter which way you look at it. Once you come into executor, you can't they can't you're not shadow anymore. You're not owned and you can't be owned. And you're not owned, you can't be owned, and you also can't own slaves. So that's why you want to do this after you do the other stuff, especially after you establish your EINs and all that stuff, because this takes you out of that system. Now, of course, you can always put on another hat and do, to get things done, because again, this is a hat. Like one thing I don't like about the way he describes this is like, oh, this is the end all be all, but this is all on paper. This is still not you, the live person walking around. It's just another, way to cover yourself from all of the paper genocide and whatnot that they do. But it's still not, none of these things are you, the living person. So there's no substituting that. Like, there's no substituting that, even though they try to make it seem like it's kind of like, oh, it's all the same thing, right? So And of course, this has to deal with contracts, right? This is all about the ability, your ability under the Constitution to contract freely. And so, as an executor, from the executive position, you can contract freely with individuals to get things done, but you're not, again, owning them without paying them and all that kind of stuff. So that's the thought process to keep in mind. So also, when you mail out executor letters, you also mail copies to yourself so that um you're using the postal system to certify that the documents were indeed sent out, even though all executor documents have to be notarized. So they're notarized by the state. Um, Not all of them. Wait, all of them? Hold on. I don't know why I say that. Let me look. I don't think all of them though. Uh, that's a good. That's a good question. No, you don't have to get them all. No, you do. You have to get them all notarized. Yep, you have a notary public place their stamp or witness seal here. Um, yeah, yep, they all have to be. Um, yep, they all have to be notarized. So this moves you into dealing with the notaries as witnesses, which is what they're how they're supposed to be used. Um, so the thing about the estate is that so the estate is the highest court in the land. So that's why when you send out an executor letter, it is literally like a final judgment. And that's why things have to be worded in such a way you don't really include. They're really short letters. You're not giving all the background and all that stuff. You can include supplementary documents that make the points that you're trying to make, but you don't include all of that in your executive letter. You just tell the person, "This is what I'm telling you to do. Prove to me that you have." What is the language on that document? Hold on, let me read it to you. It's really crazy. So the text in like a sample executor letter. So you would send this to, for example, if you had a court date or something they wanted you to do, some kind of hearing, tickets or something like that, stuff they're trying to deal with that you've already dealt with using like a bill of exchange and they didn't respond to that, then you may have sent them some like beneficial owner paperwork saying, hey, you got the wrong person, they're still bothering you. Now you would send an executor letter. So the executor letter will say something like, not something like, it would say this very specifically. Enclosed you will find abandoned paperwork which appears to erroneously allege that the place and the name of the title who sought the paperwork, such as the bank or whoever, right? Whoever it is that you're sending this letter to, by their unwarranted acts, fraudulently claim authority from this office to administrate for your estate name. That false claim is hereby adjourned. Basically, you're telling them you're making a false claim. Now, leave me alone. That's literally what you're saying, because now because you've taken over your estate, not just by creating the estate, but setting up the paperwork like the secure creditor and the beneficial owner, saying who you are, establishing who you are. Now you're coming in and saying, okay, I'm in charge of this state, which means if you send something in that name is the property or the copyright, quote unquote, of the state, of the estate. And so they can't really, they can there's nothing, they know that that's the highest thing. But again, do they follow any of this stuff? Does it make a difference? No, they don't care. This is a completely lawless country. They follow zero laws, zero rules. They do whatever they want. But we have to remain in honor, because that is what, as you work on this paperwork, that's the number one rule. remain in honor. You cannot do things that are dishonorable, because eventually somebody's going to catch up with them and say, what have you guys been doing? Why have y'all been doing this? With the amount of paperwork I've sent to the federal government, state governments, these, I can't imagine if any legitimate attorney general went in and was like, yeah, let me see all the estate letters that you got. And because they have to keep them, they don't throw this stuff away. When you mail it in, they may not respond to you, but they definitely can't get rid of it. So, because that would be a whole big extra crime that they don't want to get involved in. So, eventually, the chickens will come home to roost on this stuff. They can't ignore it forever. They just can't. So in the second paragraph, it says, you will forthwith return and transmit the specific written delegated authority to represent that authorization to administrate or act as a trustee of the estate that has been warranted, together with a certified copy of your oath for the office, chief of counsel, whoever it is at that office that they're holding. Because when they take an oath, they have to adhere to the law. Answering these documents is a part of the law. They know that they have to do it. They don't do it anyway. They don't care. That's what I say. This is a lawless country. They don't care, even though they know they have to based on what is in the law. They don't have a choice. So so you also in this document, accompanied by certified copies of your bar bond, because basically every person who operates as an official is basically operating as a lawyer too. And so they have to be bonded. That would be the bond. Now, back to something that um oh, the other guy said, I can't remember his name right now. Um, I can't remember his name right now. You never want to contact the organization that bonds the government officials, because that is asking for a removal attempt from this planet. So won't mess with them. Leave them out of it, because they don't. If they have to handle threats to their because basically, if you can't be bonded, um, um, you can't serve in office. So that's one of the reasons why, if you follow any of this politics stuff, all of these law firms made deals with Trump not to have their security clearances removed. He's gotten like something like $600 million in free legal um, aid, basically, from these different law firms, not to remove their security clearances, because if you can't be bonded, you can't get a security clearances. So those individuals who he stripped their security clearances, they can never work in public office, or really any office that's executive in nature in this country, because they can't be bonded. And so you don't mess with the government and their bonds. But in this letter, they know what that means. They know that you can um file a claim against their bond. And there's other ways of doing that. I studied that a lot in 2020, but no need to go into all the um, long details here. But there are ways that you can challenge these elected officials' bonds. But the biggest thing is them knowing that you know that you can challenge their bonds, and not because they're elected official, but because, like it says here, you're challenging their bar bond. That's a totally different set of things that they don't want people to know how this works. A lot of this stuff works because nobody knows how it works. But once people start saying, "Hey, don't you have a bar bond? What's the number for that? Like, I need a copy of that." So you could press the issue if you had to, but most people with sense will just leave you alone after this point. Although these people don't have sense. Um, so whatever. And it says, and a detailed list of all other bonds, sureties, indemnifications, insurance, and court registry investment system or CUSIP numbers and a full accounting relating in any way to anyone's personal or professional involvement as referenced above in the arrogated paperwork intrusion upon the estate. That's because a lot of these elected officials are being paid from some third party to interfere with your accounts. Like that's not a, like they are being paid to interfere with your accounts. They they target people. They have groups of people that they target, but then they have certain people that they target based on, whatever secret. Okay, thank you. Whatever secret. Okay, whatever secret organization or oaths or whatever they've taken, like they also target people based on that too. So it's not like I'm on the phone. I said shush because I'm on the phone. Okay, goodbye. So it's not like an imaginary thing. This is very well known and well documented information. So that goes in every letter that you send out, and then you just add like it. All the documents have really good instructions on how to do it. And like I said, this explanation document is like 50 pages. So just about any question you have would be answered with this, once you get to this particular point. Um, okay, let me talk about a couple of things. So, as an executor, right, if you have to do business where some kind of a license is required, like a doctor or something like that, you would do that in your name. Okay. Okay. You would do that in your name and not in some, other oh my gosh. You would do that in your name because once you are an executor, you have protections. Basically, stop, leave, please leave. Thank you. I'm sorry. The 4-year old is acting crazy. You have the same protections as the state does. So, for example, if you're trying to take something up like the state of, can you stop, please? Stop. You have a problem with the state, like the state of Virginia, because they're a commonwealth. So they do stuff that's a little bit weird. And sometimes, especially if you get like you're driving through Virginia, you get a ticket or something like that. They're commonwealth. Commonwealth states have very unusual things they do in a way that they set it up. So if you try to, file a lawsuit against a Commonwealth state or Kentucky, they're the same way. You're not going to get the same result as if you file something against like a regular state like Maryland. They function totally differently. So it's the same way with the state. Like if they're operating as the state of Virginia, that's not the same thing as Virginia State. And when we get into how you address like these documents, that's where that comes in because you are talking about like yourself as an individual person and the space that you take up on the land. That's a totally different situation as the corporate entity. And so if you have to do business, you want to protect the name because the name is also protected by the estate. You deposit your all of your it's everything that all the paperwork that you've done to this point is deposited as a part of your estate. And I did that, I do believe, with a UCC3. Um, I think I did a non-UCC because non-UCCs don't go through the state. So yeah, I do believe I used a non-UCC1 or non-UCC3 when I started my estate process. But again, that's like another thing. So biggest section of this, uh, man, this is taking a long time to explain, is the post office. So the general post office and then like the regular post office. The way that they tell you to do it in this particular with these examples, it's just not the way that I would do it. They say, and it is true, you can get a general post office box basically for free if you fill out the paperwork a certain way, and it's fairly complicated. So that's why I don't like recommend it doing it the way that they said, because it is quite complicated and it's a little bit over the top. If you ask me, like some of the stuff is just a little bit much. That's just like as the executor, you can take a certain series $1 bill, attach it to an estate letter, and send it to the court and force them to close a particular case. That's a whole nother, set of things. But that's why I just there's a lot of ways to handle a problem. I always handle problems the standard way first, but as you see with these different processes, they get more and more complex. And so you don't want to confuse yourself, which is quite easy to get confused, but whether you're talking about the estate or the Admiralty or even the Roman citizen, you can get really, really confused. And so you really have to take the time to learn each step um, and make sure you have a good understanding. That's why it's good to go through the different stages of paperwork and sending out the letters, because then when you see a problem come, you kind of think of, okay, how am I going to respond to this? Because once you get these things set up, like I said, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. If somebody hands you something that they're supposed to, you have multiple number of ways to drag it out. So until they realize that you know what you're talking about, because a lot of the stuff is nobody understands any of this stuff. They have their one little piece that they get, but they don't really get the rest of it. It's when you realize, oh, she actually knows the whole part of it, they start to just leave you alone. So with the post office box, it's good because the way that you have the mail addressed to you is to your general post office box, which puts it out even with a um what is those numbers called? Uh Lord, my poor brain. Zip code. Even a zip code. There's a certain way you can put the zip code that puts it outside of the military jurisdiction. And that's how you address things when you're dealing with your estate. And this makes it so that they can't really intercept mail that you're sending legally. Now, this is not one of the things where you don't pay for the postage, because with the estate, it's trying to put you under the jurisdiction of the Stamp Act. Uh, I always voluntarily put myself under the Stamp Act because the Stamp Act has guarantees for if you pay the postage, they kind of have to deliver the product. And even if you use a stamp, whether you use a physical stamp or a meter stamp, when you executor, it doesn't matter. Some of the other stages, it does. When you hear, it doesn't matter because you want proof of mailing more than anything else with the executor. Not necessarily that it has to be mailed in a specific postal currency. But we do use a lot of stamps, especially when you're doing your UCC3s, because those are all validated, which is why you want to opt yourself in to the Stamp Act through your UCC, your non-UCC process, because then you say, oh, this is thing that I'm actually subject to. So make sure that you take this as a document, because what the Stamp Act did is that it assigned value to contracts. And so, like for example, if you're in a tribe, you know that I send the documents out, you have to sign the back of, you have to sign over that because that's the value that was assigned to the contract. And one contract, they can't interfere with your ability to contract. That's why you're always trying to into contracting. See, what they want you to do is opt into slavery, which doesn't require contracts. When you opt into contracts, then you have more rights than opting into just general slavery, which is basically how they run it. So he's, oh my gosh, this thing got like a few pages on the freaking post office. I'm not even through half of this document. I'm not going to talk about all this stuff because it's just too much. Oh, so when you change your mailing, okay, so after you after you do your acceptance, you send that to the governor and to the attorney general for the state that you're living in and the state you're born in. And you send a copy to yourself. Once you do that, you send a letter to the postmaster general for your location where you are. And so when you send that letter to the postmaster general, you are letting them know that you are changing your address. Now, the way David Clarence describes it is that once you do that, you're not going to receive, you shouldn't be receiving any more mail at your house. Now, that can be true. I have seen that happen. I think it just depends on where you are in your jurisdiction. It didn't work for me here. All the time, none of that has stopped. So, but other people, they did actually stop receiving the mail. This is why you want to already have post office box set up, because if they're just going to start holding the post office in some random location, and when you're trying to get your hands on it, they're going to have to go through 1,000 people to figure out where this special location is that they're holding your mail, and it is the most annoying thing. There's no talking about. You'll be like, yeah, I'm here at the General Post. Say, oh, you have mail on? No, General Post. They're like, General, what's that? They don't even know what it is. So that's a office box for not to start this process, but you get your post office box just included as part of your fees of what has to be paid for. I don't know. Again, some people just have this thing about not paying for anything. It doesn't matter because you have tax credit. So even if you do pay it, you get deductions. I don't understand what the deal is. I just don't take that perspective. I might just pay for it. Make your life easy. And then there's a certain way that you fill out the application. That you address your mail, it has to be for and anything you send the we'll go into that more. But that's like the most important thing. You send that out to the postmaster, you have your post office box already set up, and now you're doing business from your post office box. Um and so I think something that was before the Amazon thing and all the door dashing and all that stuff. So at that time, this stopped all of that. That don't stop any of this now. No, people still get packages delivered to their houses because Amazon doesn't work through the postal system. They have their own separate system, a separate delivery that's separate from the post office. So as previously, this would have been like it, and you would have never gotten any of your house ever again. It doesn't work like that anymore. Also, you do this, especially on house, which is, some of this. If you don't own property, then this stuff is not quite as it doesn't have the same effect. But if you own property, what you would do is you would take your house number off your house. You would, put up some, because you don't want people to, if you live in a place like with an HOA, you don't want them to write you no bills. You don't want them to send you no letters, give you, mouth about your house not looking right or whatever. It's no address for them to send it to, because if you have a welcome mat, if you have numbers on your house and mailbox out, you take all of that stuff and remove it. And basically, it's almost like you're living on the grid. So when you own property, there's other documents you can do along with this that the other guy um, put out, but that's only once you're kind of like set with some of these other processes. Because again, you can do all of them, but if you do all of them at once, you're not going to understand what's going on, because it's really too complicated. Here's some examples. Um, if you are located at the General Post Office, then Title 26, number 2001, imposition and rate of tax. Imposition: a tax is hereby imposed on the transfer taxable estate of every decedent who is a citizen resident of the United States. So that doesn't apply to you. You're not subject to that. Home, your domicile would be the General Post Office, which is in the same location as the post office, but again, it's just another thing that will help you with, especially if you have a lot, like very, very high property taxes. But of course, as I've mentioned, there's lots of other ways to deal with this. Is literally not the way to deal with it. There's a lot of stuff. Oh, and extremely detailed. So, all right. So, if anyone asks you questions about this estate, you just say, I cannot answer that. It's a private estate, and I'm duty bound to clear concerning the business of the estate. If someone demands a death certificate of the estate, produce the birth certificate with the registered seal and signature. If they say it is a birth certificate, ask can they read the seal and signature of the document. The register is the probate court. That's in defined in Bouvier's. The seal on the birth certificate is factual evidence that the estate has been probated. If the judge or someone did not go to court to become the executor, show them the birth certificate, point out the seal of the register. It proves you did go to court. So here's the top of this document has a long list of definitions. It's saying that the register is a probate court, which means it's a death court. So if register is the one has a seal on there, which that's one of the 7 seals on the certificate, that proves that it's a probate court. Now, again, do they like hearing this? Are they going to give you a hard time? Of course they are. So I haven't figured out a real workaround around this, except to use a bank like Charles Schwab, a what is that? Those banks called? They're like they're over top of like the regular banks. You use them for brokerage. You use a brokerage like Charles Schwab or Fidelity or something like that. They even have some online ones. That's probably what I'm going to look into using. And with them, you can open an estate account without so many of the questions, because a lot of people who are trading on the stock market, they literally have estate accounts, or they're trading with their estate. And also, they have regular bank accounts where you can have a card and all of that. So that's just kind of how that works. Most regular banks are not. They're just going to give you a problem. They just don't want to be bothered with this stuff this way, because they don't want to do this. Something else about the estate, which is really important, is that when you are an executor, you are not the trustee. The trustee of the account is the one who is fiscally responsible for the account. When people talk about this stuff, they literally tell people, oh, you want to be the trustee. The trustee is the highest position. The trustee this and the trustee that. And when you understand how this stuff works, you start to realize that the trustee is the one that's left holding the bag. And so the trustee is basically like the slave owner. So they want you to come from thinking you're the slave owner, i.e. the trustee, because then you're still fiscally responsible for everything that goes on with the estate. as the executor. If they do something and you didn't approve of it and they don't have your permission, you can say, I'm the executor. I'm not fiscally responsible for this. That would be the D. And since all these state ofs are all acting as trustees on the account, that's what you say in the trustee letter, they literally have to be fine. They have to eat it. It's nothing that they can do. Now, of course you can use this with bills and stuff like that, but again, they don't care about none of that. These are stone cold gangsters who don't care about any of this stuff. So again, this is prevention. This is not cure. Although some of these things, they take you to court, but a lot of these companies now, they're not taking people to court anymore because people are fighting back. They don't want to be bothered with taking people to court, so they just harass you in other ways, right? They found other ways to harass people. They don't even get involved with sending the stuff to court. Only people who don't understand that, Oh, it's right here. The Office of Risk Management. That's who you don't want to be bothered with, if at all possible. There's a they have who you to, and you don't send anything to the Office of Risk Management, because even has in a document, be very careful filing claims with the above office. You could be removed permanently, permanent vacation, off the planet. Okay, sending the executor letter is a claim against their bonds. Do not send it to this office. They literally tell you, don't send here because they take people out, and I believe them. I think people, that's just not something we're gonna play with. I'm not gonna suggest it, at least. So because they're over everything, and they hold a copy of all the bonds. So what's supposed to happen is when you send an executive letter to the government, they're supposed to immediately to the legal clerk or attorney, counsel, whatever. They're supposed to get to the attorneys so that they can address it properly. And a lot of times, so many people are doing all these different processes that they just never respond to it. Although they are required to respond. Again, they all have a duty to respond. There's no, we have too many of these, we're getting out of this. What? No. They literally have to respond. They can say, I don't have time. What in the world? Okay, so yeah, I don't know, just into my documents, but I'm talking about for an hour. So, does anyone have any questions? Because I still can go finish going through the document, and maybe are actually starting to work on it because this is a lot of very, very detailed things that you have to double and triple check to make sure you get right. You how many documents I had to print out because I forgot a comma. I spelled something wrong. Need to be correct. These are coming after these people's specifically. These are direct order in your authority as if you are in your state. That's the position. You are the president of the state. So these things are documents you have to in a very manner. So you have to check them, double check them, and then you have to go get them notarized so that you can have a state bound witness. Which we have notaries and stuff like that within the tribe. We can have this. It's just, you have to kind of know what's going on. And once you've done work, you will know what's going on. This is not outside of the realm of those other things. This is literally inside of the realm. It's just another layer, another part, another piece of the puzzle, because they have this all divided in so many different pieces that you it would be pretty difficult to put this all in one course, put this all in one set of things that you do. Like basically you almost have to spend a year working on each segment just to make sure you have a full understanding. 6 months, because there's so many different pieces of it, and you really have to know what the words mean and what they mean in a particular case. um so anybody have any? I'm talking this some more next week. Um, but we also need to talk about Admiralty, and I'll move on because we'll be coming back to this over June, July, August. I'm going to do a lot of promo between now and June. We're going to go over more designs piece by piece, and also going to be making uh, instruction of how these different pieces and fit together. Part that I think a lot will understand. Really difficult to communicate the big picture if people don't understand that there's these little pieces that go together, and it's based on natural law and the way that things just work. And we've just been separated out into all these different pieces. And as you put together your trust indenture for your C'esti Que Trust, you're bringing all of those pieces back together so that they can operate from a cohesive position instead of trying to solve problems, putting all these different hats. You're saying, no, there's one hat, and it's the hat of the living person, and that's the hat that I'm wearing right now. And you can take whatever part of the slave person, former slave person, one of the things you do in the Roman citizenship process, I believe, is you free your slave. If you haven't already done that, but it comes up again in the Roman citizenship process. I think it sooner, but it comes up again in that process too. Like, free your slave, and you free yourself as owner and to a different position as a part of these processes. So it can't, put you back in as a slave. Can't put you back in chains once you have the chains taken off. So I think that's enough. I could probably talk about this for another 2 hours. This is so much information about this executor and this estate process. And I think that's why nobody really teaches it, because you have to really be like moving through the process. Although, like I said, there's lots of really, really good instructions when you're ready to get to it. So many thanks to David Clarence and his people for putting together such copious notes and understand even it, or I don't know, when people disappear from the internet, you never exactly know what happens to them. But yeah, you don't know, but they put together detailed notes, and you can follow them. They're very easy to follow. Difficult to find, but very, very easy to follow. So next week is a holiday, not week. So that first, what's that, June 2nd, I guess. We'll be back here June the 2nd, and we'll continue this series, and then about the third week in June, we'll see the top, but I'll go more detail because I'm going to get a Zoom so that I can actually show the documents and talk about it and answer questions in a more organized format. So if you have to all this stuff, just write them down, hold on to them, send them to me, and I'll answer them the best that I can. But come June, we're going to be going into this more detailed so that everybody can get a really good understanding and idea of what's going on. So I'm going to stop talking
totally
for
agree.
real this time.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I think Yeah, you got to see the documents. I think it's easier if you can see the
Yeah, you can hear me
telegram.
clearly though, Sophia?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I was gonna tell you that I had like two experiences with the executor office operating out of
Oh,
the
you
executor
used it?
office. Yeah, it was two occasions. One of them was for a debt collector, and I told them that, they will be they'll be liable to the estate for accessing, the you know, I guess my credit report basically. Forgot what I put in the letter. It
Right,
was
right,
a couple of months ago, but I told them that, it's gonna be 50,000 every day, you guys don't, remove it or whatever and stuff. You guys access the credit report, you guys, violation of the privacy, stuff like that basically. I was adding in there and telling them they're not authorized to use property of the estate. And I have no
right.
business with them. We got no business with them. We recognize no contract and stuff like that. And then they was just gone. Like it was just gone. When I checked, they got like they just came
Wow.
off my credit report. And then it was this other occasion, right, where I had this I had this case where I got locked up, whatever. And then they had put my mugshot up there and stuff. It was a little fleeting officer or whatever. And but I had got the case dismissed, but not dismissed, but I had on 2 hours probation for it, whatever. And they had put
Right.
my mugshot up there. So when I type in my name, I could see my mugshot and these people, whatever, mugshot zone and shit. So I emailed them, I'm like, yo, take my, picture down and stuff. And then they was like, yeah, you have to give us some receipt from your attorney, whatever, and stuff showing that, the case been dismissed or whatever and stuff. But at the
Oh
time
gosh.
I was knowing the executive stuff, so I told him like, yo, I emailed him like, yo, it's the property of the estate, and you're not authorized to use the property and stuff like that, blah blah blah. And then they just removed it. Like literally, I got a confirmation saying, yep,
See,
we removed it, stuff like that. And that's it. That's the two experience I had.
some people they excel other places. I guess it depends. Like if the people know what is going on, like that's crazy. That's good though. That's good to know this does work. It's not inaccurate.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel way comfortable operating, from the executive office than any other position. It feels powerful.
Now, do you have you done Admiralty though?
Did what?
Admiralty, Admiralty.
No, Admiralty, no, in what?
Okay, so that's another position you can operate from. That kind of like, but it depends on if you're in a maritime court. So if you're operating from Admiralty, you have jurisdiction over maritime courts. You're actually the deciding judge in a
Okay.
maritime court.
Okay. I didn't
If
know that
you
right there.
um I can't remember the guy's name. He about that. Yeah, did all of that stuff because the Admiralty really. I'll talk about that next time. It's actually easier than Executor. But I do agree. I think it's easiest to operate from the executor position. It's the hard to get it up. Cohesive way every so that you don't miss anything. You know, especially if you already have a lot of property and if you have a
Amongst,
lot of stuff, then it's a little bit more
yeah,
difficult.
I was going to read to you exactly what I told them. They just
Oh
responded
yeah, let's
saying
hear it.
that we remove individual arrest info if dropped, not guilty, dismissed, expunged, sealed, not processed, deceased, reduced charges,
Oh
etc.
my gosh.
So I responded and told him, um, I appreciate the response, Craig, regarding the removal of the arrest. However, I would like to clarify that I will not be providing any legal documentation from my attorney to confirm the status of the relevant
Right.
charges, as I did not authorize the use of my estate's property on your website. I kindly request that you comply with my rights under my rights. It says with my rights under the right to be forgotten and the Privacy Act, and remove my mugshot and associated personal information from the Knox KY mugshot zone without the need for additional legal documentation. And I would like to clarify that as an individual protected by the right to be forgotten and Privacy Act, I am not only required to comply. I am not only required to comply with the law. I'm basically going to say I'm only required to comply with the law and not any specific policies of your website. Since I do not have a
Right.
contractual agreement with you, I am exercising my right to request the removal of my mugshot and associated personal information from you guys' website, and therefore I am issuing a cease and desist request to remove my mugshot and personal information immediately from your website in accordance with my rights to be forgotten and applicable law. So I definitely gotta use that right there, the right to be forgotten. And I actually heard Tamika bring that up. That's why I got that from,
Wow.
literally.
Oh, yeah. I have not heard of it to be forgotten. I do know that they just signed a Take It Down Act, which I think is probably going to be helpful too in relation to what that certain stuff that people on the websites like and stuff like that. I have a feeling that's how it's going to be
Yeah,
used.
Donald
They say
Trump,
it's going to be
right?
used for. Oh yeah, that was Melania's thing. That was actually Taylor Swift. That whole explicit Taylor Swift meme that I follow the guy that made it. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. So how that got to be as big as it was because they put about him in the press conferences and I don't know, it was a lot of crazy stuff happened on X that I can't really explain to people who don't spend all day uh, digging around there. But yeah, that's what I'm picture or whatever that you did not consent to. And sexual is a very, very vague term. So I'll be really to see exactly is in that all. And it really does seem like a lot of this that people having no property that we know our rules and know our laws are just having news of the like updated versions of the law. So the old version of the law may not have necessarily applied to websites, but this law specifically applies to websites. Old versions of laws may apply to AI, but new versions of laws specifically apply to AI. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this stuff plays out and how it comes together because